Timi barely recognized the girl she had become, just 14 but already hardened by life. The last few days had turned her world upside down again. Running had felt like freedom, but freedom had been short-lived. Tayo had found them. And now her mother was gone. Her hands clenched into fists as she sat stiffly on an old wooden chair, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She wasn't a scared little girl anymore. She couldn't be. Not when her mother needed her. Ada and the man, Jide, spoke in hushed voices. The room was dimly lit, the flickering lantern casting shadows across the walls. Timi forced herself to focus, listening intently. She had to be strong. She had to be ready. Jide exhaled, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. Tayo is dangerous. He has money connections. If we're going to get Tiffany back, we need to be 2 steps ahead of him. Ada nodded. We can't just rush in. He'll expect that. Jide turned his sharp gaze to Timi. Did you see where they were taking her? Timi swallowed hard, shaking her head. No. But they had 2 cars. One was black, the other gray. The black one had a dent on the side. Jide's expression hardened. That's good information. I know someone who can trace the cars. But we need to move fast. Ada leaned forward. What do you need? Jide stood and pulled out an old phone. I'll make some calls. But if we do this, we need to be ready for anything. Tayo won't let her go easily. Timi's fists clenched. I don't care what it takes. We have to get her back. Jide's eyes softened slightly. We will. Ada placed a reassuring hand on Timi's shoulder. We'll rest for a few hours, then we'll act. You need your strength. But Timi knew she wouldn't sleep. Not until her mother was safe. Meanwhile, Tiffany sat in the corner of a dimly lit room, her wrists tied behind her. The rope bit into her skin, but she ignored the pain. Her head throbbed, and her lips were dry, but she refused to cry. Tayo sat across from her, his legs crossed, a smug expression on his face. He sipped from a glass of whiskey, watching her like a hunter watching wounded prey. You should have known better, Tiffany, he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. Running? Did you really think you could hide from me? Tiffany held his gaze, refusing to look away. Timi is gone. You'll never touch her again. Tayo chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Oh, Tiffany. You still don't get it, do you? She belongs to me. Tiffany's stomach turned. She is not yours. Tayo's smirk faded. He leaned forward, his eyes dark with anger. You should be grateful. I even let you live. After all, I could have thrown you away when you became useless to me. Tiffany clenched her fists behind her back, forcing herself to stay calm. You're a coward, she spat. You prey on the weak because you have nothing inside you but emptiness. Tayo's expression hardened. He set his glass down and stood up, walking toward her slowly. The air in the room grew heavier with each step he took. He knelt beside her, gripping her chin roughly, forcing her to look into his eyes. I will find her, he whispered. And when I do, she will wish she never ran. Tiffany's heart pounded, but she didn't let him see her fear. You'll never win. Tayo smirked again and released her, standing up. We'll see about that. He turned and walked toward the door, but before leaving, he glanced back. Enjoy your stay, my love. You're not going anywhere. The door slammed shut, leaving Tiffany alone in the darkness. She refused to let the tears fall. Instead, she whispered to herself. Hold on, Timi. Just hold on. Timi sat in silence, her fingers digging into her knees as she watched Jide pace the room. He had been making calls for the past hour, his voice clipped, his instructions short. Ada was beside her, arms crossed, deep in thought. Jide finally ended a call and turned to them. I found the location. Timi's breath caught in her throat. Where is she? Jide exhaled. Tayo is keeping her in a private house just outside the city. It's secluded, heavily guarded. Ada frowned. How many men? At least 4, Jide replied. But they're trained. This won't be easy. Timi clenched her fists. We have to do something. Ada and Jide exchanged a glance before Jide nodded. We'll go in tonight. If we wait too long, Tayo might move her again. Ada grabbed a small bag from the floor, checking its contents. Weapons. Jide nodded. I have what we need. Timi's heart raced. This was happening. They were going to rescue her mother. She swallowed back her fear and straightened her shoulders. I'm coming with you. Ada turned to her sharply.
No.
It's too dangerous. Timi shook her head. She's my mother. I'm not staying behind. Jide studied her for a moment, then sighed. She might be useful. Ada frowned but relented. You listen to everything we say. No heroics. Timi nodded, determination blazing in her eyes. Let's go get her. Night had fallen by the time they reached the outskirts of the city. Jide had driven with precision, taking back roads and avoiding major streets to ensure they weren't being followed. The car stopped a few meters away from an abandoned-looking house. The building was surrounded by a high concrete fence, its entrance guarded by two men. Jide killed the engine and turned to them. We do this quietly. No unnecessary risks. Ada reached into the bag and handed Timi a small knife. Only use this if you have to, she warned. Timi's fingers trembled as she took the weapon, but she nodded. Jide took out a silenced pistol and tucked another knife into his belt. We split up. I'll take the side entrance. Ada, you go through the back. Timi, stay close to Ada. Timi swallowed hard. This was real. They were going in. Ada gave her one last reassuring glance before slipping into the shadows. Jide moved toward the opposite side of the fence, disappearing into the darkness. Timi's heart pounded as she followed Ada, crouching low as they neared the back gate. The air was thick with tension. Then, a sudden noise, a sharp rustling, made them freeze. Someone was coming. Ada pulled Timi behind a tree, her grip firm but silent. A shadow moved near the fence. A guard. He had a rifle slung over his back, a cigarette dangling between his lips as he muttered something under his breath. He paused, listening. Timi held her breath. Her body felt frozen, every muscle tensed. The guard turned, taking a few steps toward their hiding place. Ada moved swiftly. In one fluid motion, she lunged forward, wrapping an arm around his neck, her other hand covering his mouth. The man struggled, but Ada held firm until his body went limp. She eased him to the ground, checking for more movement before signaling Timi forward. They slipped through the back entrance and into the compound. Inside the house, Tiffany sat motionless in the dark, her ears straining for any sound of movement outside. Her wrists ached from the ropes, and exhaustion was creeping in, but she refused to sleep. Then, faint footsteps. Hope sparked in her chest. She shifted slightly, angling her body toward the door. If someone was coming, she needed to be ready. A key jangled in the lock. The door swung open, and the silhouette of a man filled the doorway.
Tayo.
Tiffany's stomach twisted. His expression was unreadable as he stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. In his hand, he held a knife. I was going to be nice, he murmured, tilting his head as he crouched beside her. But you're making things difficult. Tiffany glared at him, refusing to show fear. You don't scare me. Tayo chuckled. Oh, but I should. He ran the blade lightly across the rope binding her wrists. I wonder, how much pain will it take to break you? A sudden crash sounded outside. Tayo's head snapped up, his body going rigid. The noise was followed by a loud grunt, a struggle. Voices. Then a gunshot. Tiffany's heart leaped. They had come for her. Tayo cursed under his breath and yanked her up roughly. You think I'm going to let you walk out of here? The door burst open before he could react. Jide stood in the doorway, gun raised. Behind him, Ada and Timi. Tayo, Jide said coolly. It's over. Tayo's grip on Tiffany tightened, his fingers digging into her arm as he pulled her closer, using her as a shield. His eyes darted between Jide and Ada, calculating his next move. The tension in the room was suffocating. Put the gun down, Tayo hissed, pressing the knife against Tiffany's throat. Or, I swear I'll end her right now. Timi let out a small gasp, her entire body shaking. She had never seen her mother so vulnerable, so close to the edge of danger. Fear clawed at her, but she forced herself to stay still. Jide didn't move. Let her go, Tayo. This is your last chance. Tayo scoffed. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know how this ends? His grip faltered for just a second, and Tiffany took her chance. With all her strength, she stomped on his foot and threw her head backward, hitting his nose. Tayo howled in pain, stumbling. Jide fired. The bullet struck Tayo's shoulder, making him drop the knife. Tiffany twisted away just in time as Ada lunged, slamming the butt of her gun into his head. Tayo crumpled to the floor, groaning in agony. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Timi rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. Mama. Tiffany caught her in a tight embrace, holding her so fiercely it felt like she would never let go. I'm here, baby, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm here. Ada and Jide dragged Tayo up, binding his hands behind his back. Blood trickled from his wound, but he was still conscious, his eyes filled with rage. You think this is over? He spat. Jide smirked. No, Tayo. This is just the beginning. Sirens wailed in the distance as Ada and Jide hauled Tayo outside. The night air was cool, but Timi still felt suffocated by the weight of what had just happened. She clung to Tiffany, her body trembling with relief and exhaustion. Jide turned to Ada. We need to get out of here before the police arrive. Ada nodded. I already made the call. They'll handle him. Tayo laughed bitterly. You think prison can hold me? Jide's grip on his collar tightened. It won't have to. Just then, flashing lights illuminated the compound as police vehicles screeched to a halt. Armed officers poured out, their weapons drawn. One of them, a stern-looking man in a dark uniform, approached Jide. Is this the suspect? Jide shoved Tayo forward. Yes. He's all yours. The officer studied Tayo for a moment before nodding. We've been looking for you for a long time. As the officers dragged him away, Timi felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't over, not yet, but for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Tiffany pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. We're free, baby. Timi looked up at her mother, a tearful smile breaking across her face. We are. The trial was swift but brutal. The evidence against Tayo was overwhelming, his crimes laid bare before the court. Survivors came forward, their testimonies painting the true picture of the monster he was. Timi and Tiffany sat in the courtroom, gripping each other's hands as the judge read the final verdict. Tayo Adigan, for the crimes of human trafficking, abuse, and attempted murder, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. A stunned silence filled the courtroom before whispers rippled through the crowd. Tayo's face twisted with fury, but the weight of his fate settled over him. This time, there was no escape. Tiffany exhaled deeply, her body sagging in relief. Timi squeezed her hand, a quiet tear slipping down her cheek. Justice had been served. And now, they could finally begin to heal. The months that followed were not easy. Tiffany and Timi were placed in a safe house under protection as authorities worked to dismantle Tayo's network. The trial had drawn media attention, exposing the horrors he had inflicted on countless victims. More survivors stepped forward, their voices finally being heard. Timi struggled with nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night, her body drenched in sweat. But each time, Tiffany was there to hold her, whispering reassuring words until she fell asleep again. Ada visited often, bringing updates and encouragement. Ada had become their rock, constantly checking in and ensuring they had everything they needed. Adjusting to life after Tayo was harder than Tiffany had imagined. Though he was behind bars, his shadow still loomed over them. She found herself flinching at loud noises, double-checking the locks on every door, fearing that somehow he would find a way to return. Timi was quiet most days. The once vibrant child who had dreamed of escaping to a better life now seemed lost. Therapy sessions helped, but the road to healing was long. Some days were better than others. One afternoon, Tiffany sat across from Ada in a small cafe, sipping on tea. I don't know how to move forward, Tiffany admitted, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. Some days I feel like we've won, but other days I feel like we're still running. Ada set her cup down gently. You're not running anymore, Tiffany. You're rebuilding. Tiffany sighed, rubbing her temples. I just want Timi to be happy. She will be, Ada assured her. But she needs time, and so do you. Tiffany looked out the window, watching the rain trickle down the glass.
Time.
That was all they had now. Meanwhile, Timi sat in her room at the safe house, flipping through a notebook. She had started drawing ever since Teo had taken her mother, using it as a way to put down everything she remembered about her life. Page after page, she sketched memories, some clear, some blurry, of the mother she had barely known, of the stolen moments of happiness she clung to. She had never drawn before then, but now it was the only way she knew how to keep those pieces of herself from fading away. But now, as she stared at the blank pages, something stirred within her. Slowly, she picked up a pencil and began to sketch. A mother and a daughter, standing under a bright sun. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in a future where happiness was possible. Timi sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the half-finished drawing in her lap. She had spent the last few nights working on it, erasing and redrawing, as if trying to capture something she couldn't quite put into words. She wasn't just drawing for herself anymore. She wanted to show the world who she was, what she had survived. A knock at her door made her jump. Come in, she called. Tiffany peeked inside, smiling softly. You've been quiet. Timi hesitated before flipping the notebook closed. Just drawing. Her mother walked in and sat beside her. Can I see? Timi bit her lip before slowly handing over the notebook. Tiffany studied the sketch. A girl standing in a field, the sun shining down on her. The girl's arms were stretched out, as if she had finally learned how to embrace the light after years of darkness. This is beautiful, Tiffany whispered, emotion thick in her voice. It's you, isn't it? Timi nodded slowly. I want to enter it in the school art fair. Tiffany's smile widened, her eyes glistening with pride. You should. A small flutter of excitement stirred in Timi's chest. For the first time in a long time, she had something to look forward to. The next day, she carried the drawing to school, her fingers gripping the edges tightly. Her art teacher, Mr. Okoye, greeted her with an encouraging nod as she handed it over. I had a feeling you'd enter, he said, looking over the sketch. This tells a story. Timi swallowed the lump in her throat. It does. The art fair was scheduled for the weekend, and as the days passed, anticipation built inside her. She told herself it didn't matter whether she won or not. Just submitting the piece was already a victory. When the day of the fair arrived, Tiffany, Ada, and even Jide showed up to support her. The school hall was filled with artwork, paintings, sculptures, drawings, but Timi's piece stood out in its own quiet way. As she walked through the exhibition, her heart pounded when she saw a small crowd gathered around her drawing. A woman whispered to her friend, "This one feels real, like you can feel the emotion in it." Timi exhaled, a strange warmth filling her chest. When the winners were announced, her name wasn't called for first or second place. But then, the principal took the stage for a special award. We want to recognize a student whose artwork tells a story of resilience and strength, he said, pausing before looking directly at Timi. Timi, please come forward. The room erupted into applause as Timi hesitated, then stepped onto the stage. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this kind of attention, but as she saw her mother and Ada beaming at her, she knew one thing. She was no longer afraid of being seen. This was just the beginning. 1 year later, Timi stood in front of a blank canvas in a brightly lit studio, the scent of paint lingering in the air. Her name had started to gain recognition in the local art scene, and she had even sold a few pieces. Tiffany stood beside her, holding a warm cup of tea. You've come so far, she whispered. Timi smiled, dipping her brush into a vibrant shade of yellow. So have you, Mama. Tiffany had taken Ada's advice and finally allowed herself to embrace the future. She had moved into a new home, started working toward opening her own bakery, and even allowed herself to trust again. Jide and Ada remained a part of their lives, their presence a constant reminder that family wasn't always about blood. It was about the people who showed up when you needed them most. As Timi began to paint, she let the colors flow freely, no longer bound by fear or darkness. Each stroke was a declaration. They had survived. And now they were truly living.